The land of Judah had become a cracked silence. Fields that once promised bread were pools of dust under a sun that seemed to have forgotten mercy. In that hush, a family packed what little they could carry and left Bethlehem, the house of bread, to seek food in the land of Moab. They went because hunger narrows horizons. It demands decisions that hope would never have chosen. This is where the story begins, with scarcity, with a choice to leave, and with God's quiet hand already at work behind the scenes. Ruth, the woman who changed history with God's choice. How did a Moabite widow become the hinge on which a line of promise turned? Stay with this story. If you love Bible stories told with heart, hit subscribe. Imagine a caravan crossing the dawn, donkeys heavy with sacks, children clutching a mother's skirt. Elimelech takes his wife Naomi and his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and they go to Moab. For a time there is provision. Mahlon marries Ruth, Chilion marries Orpah. There are moments of ordinary life, meals shared, roofs at night, the small comforts of family. Then grief comes like a winter wind. Elimelech dies, the 2 sons die. What remains is a household emptied of men, and a woman named Naomi, who is hollowed by loss. She looks at her life and calls it, aloud, a new name, Mara, bitter, for the Almighty has dealt bitterly with her. That name is a wound. She returns, not as the woman who left with hope, but as one who has been eroded by sorrow. How do you carry a name like that back to Bethlehem, to a town that will remember your first departure? How do you tell the world you are still worth belonging to? Into that pain stand 2 daughters-in-law with different responses. Orpah, after cradling Naomi's grief for a time, chooses to go back to her people and her gods. Her departure is not portrayed as disloyalty, so much as a sad, human turning toward the familiar when grief becomes too heavy. Ruth does something else. She takes Naomi's hand and makes a vow that shocks the ordinary expectations of the day. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. It is a covenantal speech. In one sentence, she leaves behind her birthland, adopts Naomi's loss as her own, and makes a public transfer of allegiance to Naomi, to Israel, to the God of Naomi. This is the pivot. Do you see the bravery wrapped in those words? A foreign woman chooses a foreign God and a foreign people as her own. They come back to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest, a season that tastes like hope. Naomi walks through the town and hears her name asked, "Is this Naomi?" She answers, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me." She carries shame like a cloak. But Ruth's loyalty becomes the seed of mourning.
Ruth goes out early to glean in the fields. This is no charity. It is the exercise of a law of mercy that God's people were commanded to practice. The law said, when you harvest, do not make a clean sweep of the edges. Leave something for the poor, for the widow, for the foreigner. It placed the vulnerable into the rhythm of the community. Gleaning was practical grace woven into the fabric of harvest. Ruth moves through the tall stalks of barley like one who knows humility and hunger alike. She bends, she gathers, she keeps her eyes low as she works, and God's providence, hidden, patient, leads her to a field belonging to Boaz. Boaz is a man of means and standing, yet he is not a caricature of power. He is observant, rooted in godly practice, gentle in small things. His servants notice the woman and report back. Boaz asks, "Who is she?" He hears Ruth's story. He does not treat her as an object of curiosity.
He treats her as a human in need. He speaks to her with protective kindness. He tells his workers not to harass her and to let grain fall deliberately for her to glean. He invites her to eat with the reapers and gives her roasted grain. He notices not only the visible need, but the inner fidelity. That is Boaz's character, justice practiced in compassion, an integration of law and heart. There's a small, tender scene at evening where Ruth returns with a weight of barley. Naomi takes notice and cries out, "This is no minor harvest. Ruth has worked hard and come back with more than enough." Naomi's bitterness begins to crack. She sees in Ruth something that could restore a name and a future. Naomi speaks a plan, and do not mistake its boldness. Naomi recognizes that Boaz is a relative. He is near in the line of kinsmen who had the right, under Israelite custom, to act as a redeemer. The ancient law allowed a close relative to redeem a family member's land or to marry a widow to preserve a deceased man's line. Naomi counsels Ruth to act within this tradition, but intentionally, carefully, and with dignity. The plan is not a seduction. It is a culturally sound appeal for protection and continuity. On the night of the threshing, on the era, where the grain is separated from the chaff under the open sky, Naomi dresses Ruth with the seriousness of an elder planning a rescue. The threshing floor is a public, sacred, sordid place of breads making, of raw work, and of ritual. Ruth approaches Boaz at night, lies at his feet, and makes a petition according to the customs of the time. Her action is full of humility and risk. She does not demand, she asks. Boaz responds with respect and with the gravity of one who understands law and mercy. He does not take advantage. Instead, he honors her with words that both protect her and set the stage for legal resolution. But there is another relative nearer in right, one who has the first claim. That moment raises the tension. Will the community uphold Naomi's rights? Will the Redeemer act? Boaz moves to the public place where Israel settled disputes and finalized agreements, the city gate. The gate is more than a doorway. It is the court of the town, where elders sat, witnesses gathered, and decisions were made openly. There, Boaz calls the nearer kinsman and lays out the facts. Boaz frames his appeal not as a romantic pursuit, but as a legal redemption, to buy back family land that belonged to Elimelech, and in doing so, to preserve the name of the dead within Israel. The nearer kinsman recognizes the cost. By redeeming the land and marrying Ruth, he might compromise his own inheritance. He declines. The community hears. In that public act of refusal, Boaz steps forward. There is a ritual, an exchange of footwear, the removal of a sandal to seal a transaction, an ancient sign that the deal was witnessed and sealed. Boaz pledges to redeem and to take Ruth as wife. What is happening here is remarkable in several ways. First, it is legal and communal. The matter is settled in the presence of witnesses under the law's procedures. Second, it is moral. Boaz chooses to accept the burden of responsibility, to link his own name to a widow who is also a foreigner. Third, it is providential. God's purposes are moving, often through ordinary means, through harvest laws, through a man's kindness, through a widow's brave steps, through a gate's legal process. No thunderbolt from heaven is required, yet every human act is being woven into a tapestry that God will not waste. Boaz takes Ruth as his wife. The marriage itself is not ornamental, it is restorative. It restores Naomi's place in the community. It restores the line that was in danger of ceasing. It restores dignity to a woman who had nothing of her own. When Ruth bears a son, they name him Obed. Women of the community gather. There is rejoicing, not only for Naomi, but for the household and for the town. Naomi takes the child, holds him to her breast, and feels the arc of her life bend from bitter to blessed. She tells the neighbors, "A son has been born to me. I have a grandson." Where once she had called herself Mara, she now receives a name for this child, Obed. Her grief is not erased. Grief is not something you simply erase, but it is healed into praise. She says, "The Lord has given me my reward." Her mouth, which had named God as her oppressor, now names God as giver. This son, Obed, becomes the father of Jesse, and Jesse becomes the father of David. The genealogical thread runs forward into Israel's royal history. Later generations look back and see a Moabite woman in the lineage of Israel's king. What strikes the heart is not that Ruth single-handedly produced the Messiah. It is that God's choice frequently moves through unexpected people and humble faith. A foreign widow's fidelity is woven into the lineage from which a king will arise, a lineage that ultimately points to the one Christians call the Messiah. Providence often chooses what the world overlooks.
As we reflect on the arc of Ruth's life, certain motifs stand out. Providence operates not as mere accident, but as God's hidden faithfulness. It is present in the fields where Ruth bends to pick barley, in Boaz's attentiveness, in Naomi's counsel, and in the law's provision for the vulnerable. Inclusion appears boldly. A Moabite woman, an outsider, becomes part of God's covenant community. The story confronts any claim that the divine plan is limited to insiders. Here, mercy extends beyond ethnic and national boundaries, signaling a broader horizon for God's compassion. Loyalty and covenantal fidelity are central. Ruth does not act out of calculation, she acts out of devotion. Her words to Naomi are a covenant spoken and lived. "Your people will be my people. Your God, my God." That pledge changes the trajectory of her life. It shows that small acts of faithfulness, returning to a bitter mother-in-law, gleaning in a field, submitting to a risky petition, are not small in God's economy. Ordinary faithfulness becomes the vessel for extraordinary outcomes. And yet, the story refuses easy triumphalism. Naomi's grief remains a real thread. The joyful child does not erase the graves of Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion. The story respects sorrow. It does not pretend that Providence exempted this family from loss. What the narrative does show is restoration. God works to restore name, land, and lineage through ordinary human means. That restoration is communal. It involves laws designed to protect the vulnerable, the integrity of a godly man who honors those laws, and a woman whose choice reorients her entire life. There are lessons here for how we live in our ordinary days. When fields around us feel dry, when we face loss, exile, or bitterness, where do we place our hope? Ruth points us to loyalty over expedience, to belonging over comfort, to the risky path of faithfulness. Boaz points us to the integration of justice and kindness. Naomi teaches us that grief is honest, but not final. God may turn mourning into praise in ways we do not predict. Do not overlook the communal character of redemption. The gate scene matters because it is public. Redemption is carried out not in secret, but before witnesses. The community's role in blessing and recognizing the restoration underscores how faith is social. God's redemption frequently involves the gathered covenant people. The law of gleaning is not an abstract charity. It is a structure that required every farmer to leave room for the outsider. That structure is the very stage where Ruth meets Boaz. God used social law and human kindness together. Finally, remember the surprising inclusivity of God's plan. The presence of Ruth, a Moabite, in the genealogy of David serves as a theological signpost. God's ways are not limited to the expected. God reaches into foreign lands and into the lives of those we might reject. The inclusion of the outsider becomes one of the story's most powerful theological claims. In a world that often divides, Ruth's story stands as a testimony that God's redemptive purposes move through unexpected borders and through unlikely instruments. So when the historian tries to trace the line that led to David, and later to the fulfillment Christians perceive in the Messiah, that line carries within it Ruth's pledge at Naomi's feet, her gleaning, Boaz's restraint and honor, the gate's legal clarity, and Naomi's reclaimed joy. The story does not reduce to a single cause and effect. Instead, it reveals a pattern. God's providence, human faithfulness, and communal structures intersect to bring about restoration. In that intersection, a Moabite woman's choice becomes part of the history that shapes a people. As you leave this story, consider two questions. Who in your life needs the kind of loyalty Ruth offered? And where are the places in your community where small acts of mercy can be practiced as a matter of course? These are not abstract queries. They are invitations to embody an ancient rhythm. Leave some of your harvest for others. Make room at your table. Choose loyalty when leaving seems easier. Ruth's life teaches us to notice how God often hides mighty purposes in the small decisions of ordinary people. She did not act to create a national line of kings. She acted out of love for Naomi and devotion to a new people and God. Yet God's choice to include her in the story shows that no faithful action is ever wasted. Providence, braided through a widow's loyalty, would become a thread in a tapestry far larger than she or Naomi could have imagined. So remember the cracked fields and the hands that moved through them. Remember Naomi's bitter name and how it softened into praise. Remember Boaz's careful integrity and how law and kindness can be married. Remember the gate, with elders watching, a sandal exchanged, a name restored, and a community blessing. And remember the little child Obed, wrapped in cloth, whose life would carry forward the line that shaped a nation's destiny. If Ruth's faith touched you, type Amen below and subscribe to walk more stories like this together. Who in your life needs your loyalty today?